Speaking of analog music, real quick, I want to touch on 2004's High Water. Um,
Analog like a motherfucker, yeah.
exactly, as analog as it gets. First of all, who is the Blue Series Continuum? Because I hadn't heard of them before.
They
Digging
were
into
a
that.
group of there's Matthew Shipp, who was the main sort of guy, was a famous jazz piano player. William Parker, who was a famous bassist. And I'm stoned, so I'm not going to try and rattle off
No
everybody's name.
worries.
But
No worries.
it was a group of musicians who were putting jazz records out. They created this thing, Blue Continuum series. It wasn't like they were a band. It was like they started doing these projects, I think, helmed by Matthew Shipp. His perspective was that jazz needed to not just stay in its own lane. Jazz needed to commingle with other types of musicians and other types of
Hmm.
music thinkers, and creators. So they started doing collaborations with different types of producers, some from the hip hop world. They did one with Anti Pop Consortium. They did
Hmm.
one with me. So basically, it was just them trying to throw themselves into the hands of someone else and see what the result. Because just like
Hmm.
any other form of music, especially something like jazz, now this is free jazz too. Like all
Right.
of these musicians were essentially anarchists. They were all classically trained up to a certain point, but then they were too goddamn ill to even bother with
Yeah.
that. They were trying to get to the purest form of what the music was. It was a movement,
Right.
and it was something that produced a lot of amazing music in the past. And like anything that starts without rules, it started to, I think you could say, not as a criticism, but as an observation, that if you have the same non rules for 50 years, then they become rules. You know, um,
Right.
that
Right.
was my perspective on it. It was like, what do you do with people who aren't reading off music, don't know where the song is going to end, but at the same time, they're all sitting in a room and they're all playing, they're all sort of freestyling, as we would call it, all this
Hmm.
music. And then they're really in tune with each other and they're watching each other and they crescendo and they all of a sudden, you're in the room with all these dudes and they're all standing up at the same time. Like no one said
Whoa.
anything. No one, there was nothing on a piece of paper that said this is when we crescendo. And all of a sudden, they're all standing up and they're crescendoing, and then they're breaking down. They've played with each other and they've played with this type of structure of music so much that even in the type of music where there are no rules, there is a sort of unspoken structure to the
Mm.
shit that's all based on their experience and their vibe from what they've done before. So I was asked to come in and produce it, and of course I was terrified. I took mad long to think about. I took mad long to think about it, and I was like, I don't know. Let me think about it. And a week went by, and I was like, all right, well, let's get up the bravery to do this. And I was like, all right, I've decided I'll do it. I'll do the song. And they were like, no, 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 album. I was like,
Hmm.
literally thought they were asking me to do a song,
And they
and
do.
I was
Wow.
and I was scared to do that at the time. They were like, nah, actually, we meant will you do the whole album? And I was like, oh, fuck. And so, like anything, I had to think about what my approach might be or what my values of that situation might be because I really am just a self-taught bedroom beat making musician motherfucker, and that's where I was. And
Hmm.
I had gotten pretty far in my own experience with that, but getting in a room with people and being the driving force behind it, but not being the main artist behind it, wasn't something I was particularly used to, and especially working with those types of musicians. So I had to think about what it was that I might be able to contribute to that, and that also might be able to bring into my own world and make it work for me. And what I settled on was two things. A, I would bring some music in. I would create some shit and that had vibe and tone and direction, and I would bring that in, and they would play to that. They would freestyle to that.
Hmm.
So at least I knew that whatever I got, it was in the tone of something that I already,
Mm.
it was in the key and in the structure to some degree of what I already knew I liked and with an idea that I was pursuing as a beat. The
Right.
second thing that I did was I, much to their at first chagrin, but then ultimately their
Hmm.
acquiescence, was that I brought in sheet music.
Really.
Yep. So I hit my dad up, who's a jazz pianist and singer, who I'd never done anything, I'd never worked with, never done anything. He kind of retired from music, and I asked him, I kind of tricked him. I said, because also I kind of looked at it like maybe an opportunity to fit my father into this situation.
Interesting.
So I hit him up and I was like, "Hey, Dad, I'm doing this record, and I want to have these guys basically cover some standards. I want to hear what their version of a standard would be because I knew that they were essentially, like I said, anarchists.
Mm-hmm.
When it came to, they didn't fucking look at sheet music. When I presented them with sheet music that my father had picked, he had given me 3 or 4 choices that he sang. So he sat at the piano and he sang them for me. You know, he sent me what they were, and I got the sheet music. And I ended up picking this one. Long story short, I took some of the songs that he had picked, and I got the sheet music and I brought it in,
Mm-hmm.
and I handed it out. And they were kind of like, what the fuck? Yo, man, I haven't read sheet music since I was, 30. And these dudes are 60, 70, some of them. There was a little grumbling, but they were game. They were like, all right, well, fuck it. And so that was the other component of it. So I had them riffing on things, because I was like, man, that's like probably the only thing I can provide you is like the one rule that you have, like the thing where you're the most free. Like maybe I can take that away from you, and it'll jostle this thing into a different result.
Wow.
Not that your results that you got before were bad, but we're looking for a new result here, right? And so those are the 2 elements that I had. I had them improvising to things that I had created at home, and I had them playing different standards and things in their way that had already been established, and then I would take those in and turn them into turn them into structured songs. So it was this really weird back and forth process of me like just trying to figure out why the fuck am I here? Like what can I do? And that was what I could do, and my father ended up singing this like tragic, I don't know if he knew he was doing this shit or if he was trying to send me a really heavy-handed message, but it was, you hearing your father sing this song called Yesterday, when the moon was blue or whatever. When the moon was blue, yeah, yesterday. When the moon was blue. And he's just like this lament about all the mistakes he's made in his past and the people he's been, an asshole to, and he's loved, and now he's at the end of his life and he's alone. And I'm listening to this fucking song and my father singing this shit. And I'm just like, come on, man. Like, this is this is low hanging fruit. Like, just say it to me, dude. Like, you don't have to sing it to me. Like, shit. And it was really powerful. It was really powerful to hear my dad say this, because my dad, I get the feeling, does have a lot of regret. As I'm sure anybody with a bunch of empathy and a bunch of self-reflection when they get to their later years, anyone who's worth a damn probably wishes they could have changed some of the ways that they acted in the past. So that's how I took it. I don't take it like, oh, you lived a tragic life, but it was this really powerful jam. And that became one of the centerpieces and it was a standard. It was something that was, but here's my father choosing it. He could have chosen anything. Wow. It was like a Rorschach test, like, choose some songs, Dad. And he was like, here's one about my tragic regret, and you're just like, oh shit, so he's on the record, and that was a big sort of one of the reasons why I did the record in the first place, because I had a suspicion and a plan to rope my dad into it. So I could at least say before my recording career is over that I did something with my father.
Stony Island Audio.